This Quoircast Podcast episode is brought to you by Apostates Anonymous, the show you turn to when you're no longer an evangelical, or even a Christian. Join hosts Matthew J. DiStefano and Keith Giles as they tip over just about every sacred cow known to man. You're sure to have a good time if you're a heathen or heretic or apostate or reprobate. If you're an evangelical, maybe you won't have such a good time. But either way, we want you to listen. You can check out Apostates Anonymous wherever you get your podcast fix. Now, on to the show.
Western Christianity has spent the last 2,000 years telling everyone they're separated from God.
This is Not Church with John and Nat Turney.
All right, let's kick the tires and light the fires, Big Daddy. Welcome to the podcast. My name is Nat Turney. I'm with my big brother, John. Say hi, John.
Hi, John.
And you are tuning into the podcast called This Is Not Church. Why? Maybe you were tricked into coming by. I don't know. Maybe you were bribed by somebody. All kinds of reasons why people stumble upon.
I could be, hold on. Wait. I could be bribed. I could be bribed to come on this podcast? You mean people might give me money?
Haven't you been bribed to this point?
Well, not with like money.
Oh, no. But every time I promise you that I will be here, that's a promise of a reward for your showing up. So, John, you have been bribed. Consider yourself bribed. So,
okay. All right. I hear your cat.
Yeah, I know, right? I had the temerity to leave the cat alone all day, and now he's making his presence known. Like, how dare you? Yeah. At least he didn't destroy the camper while I was gone today. So anyway, we digress as we normally do. Yep. We should actually, that should be the tagline, John. This is not church podcast. We digress.
Yes. Every day.
What do you do on the podcast? We digress. We rabbit trail. We lose the plot constantly,
yep.
But in
about 30 seconds.
We should actually start timing how long it takes for us to start rabbit trailing. It doesn't matter. That's what people are here for. It's the charm, John. This is the charm of the podcast. So anyway, all right. Before we get too far afield here, we're here today with an awesome guest. I'll read a quick bio, and then we're just going to jump head first into a conversation. But Daniel Henderson is with us. Let me read this for you real quick. With a 40-year career in education, Daniel Henderson has the grounding of being a lifelong Midwesterner and having traveled extensively. His teaching career in the field of history and religion has given many of his students inspiration and motivation to pursue their own careers in these fields. Dan has traveled to Europe and Central America and all over the United States. He has a passion for history and historic sites. He is currently publishing a personal story of his own faith journey called Confessions of a Recovering Evangelical. It will be out in the fall of 2022. And that, my friends, is a very quick bio, but we're going to get more from the man himself. Welcome to the podcast, Dan.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys. I got to tell you that I've got a long bio, but my biggest goal in life right now is to grow a beard as long as you guys.
Well, see, that, my friend, is a worthy aspiration.
I've got a beard. But it's not quite it's not quite like you guys. So.
It's kind of like we were talking about before we started recording. This is less a style or some sort of choice and less just a function of my laziness. I just don't like to shave, and so I don't want to. I don't know. I'm not sure what John's excuse is, except that his beard is majestic. So why not?
It is.
They're awesome.
It is majestic. Well, I mean, for me, it was when I turned 50. I was like, you know what? Screw it. I don't care what people think about the way I look anymore. If this is what I want to do, this is what I'm going to do.
There you go.
Well, the secret was no one ever cared to begin with. So
right.
True,
yeah.
See?
So that's the thing you have to learn. By the time you get my age, you realize nobody really cared ever.
Yeah,
in
right.
your life. So
I think the only person that ever really cared about like how long my hair was my father, and he was having none of that.
Yeah. Dads will care. Yeah,
Dad didn't quite understand the argument. I used to really bristle at this because people in our, John and I were raised up in the 70s and the 80s in youth group and evangelical churches, and they used to get on to us about our long hair. And I'm like, Jesus had long hair. Every picture I've ever seen where you depict Jesus, he has long hair, but suddenly I'm feminine or, whatever. They would always, try to shame us into cutting our hair.
They make us read the story of Samson who loses his power when his hair is cut off. And I'm like, I'm just trying to retain mine. Okay.
Like none of those arguments were ever persuasive though, were they?
No.
Like, but Dad, I'm just trying to be like Jesus. He's like, no, you're not. Bullshit. No, you're not. You just want to be like those rock and rollers. So anyway, hey, if you don't mind, Dan, our normal jumping off point question wise, when we get a guest and we want to get to know somebody, is to ask them a little bit about their faith journey. So if you don't mind kind of bringing us up to speed on how that all went down, that'd be great.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I've been a born-again evangelical Christian for about 40 years. I went forward at a Billy Graham crusade in 1964. Now, that was a while ago. I was a young kid, and I grew up in the church, probably like you guys did, I suppose. But I went forward, accepted Christ, and for 40 years after that, until 2005, something like that, I lived as an evangelical. I was a teacher in Christian schools. I went to seminary, went to Bible college, did the whole route. And along the way, I had doubts, I had uncertainties, I had things that just didn't fit, thoughts and ideas that didn't fit. And of course, in the evangelical world, I couldn't really bring that up. I couldn't talk about those things. Yeah, but they were there. And but by 2005, I walked away and said, that's enough. I can't deal with it anymore. And I'm moving on. So that's where I'm at. Now, the result of that was I started writing about this transition, and it resulted in a book which was just published last month in October here by Quoir Publishing. And man, it has taken off. I can't tell you how well it's taken off, and people are really enjoying it.
Wow. Okay. And so that book is The Confessions of a Recovering Evangelical, right? Which
that's it. Yeah.
Our bio says will be coming out, but in truth, it has come out.
Yeah. It came out about a week, maybe about a week and a half ago. Right?
Awesome. Okay. Well, that's amazing. We're big fans of Quoir, John and I. So we have a good relationship with those guys. And
they're great. They're great over there.
And I love the direction that they've gone, and I love what they're going to continue to pursue as Matt and Keith take over the helm and push things forward. It's really great. So yeah. So let's talk about this book then. So from your perspective, having been sort of dyed in the wool, born and raised evangelical, I guess. I mean, at what age were you when you went forward? You said.
Well, I must have been around 10 years old, but
all right. So yeah.
Yeah. Being an evangelical before 1980 was very different than being an evangelical after 1980.
Oh yeah.
And when I became an evangelical, we were still kind of in the hippie movement. We were Jesus people. We didn't even call ourselves Christian. We were just running around with other hippies and talking about loving people, and the message of Christ really kind of resonated with a lot of folks like that in those days, as we were reaching out to, in the civil rights movement, in the war, all that good stuff. And then I found out by 1980 that you had to vote for Ronald Reagan to be a good Christian. And that was a shock. That was a shock to me. I had never had anybody tell me that I had to be, of a certain political party or persuasion to be a good Christian. Never entered my mind. And that really set me off on a different course. I stayed with it for a long time after that, but it was just so counterintuitive to me to think about that, and you can see today where it's led. You can see where it's ended up. It's now just crazy. It's craziness is what evangelical Christianity has become.
Well,
and it's Christian. Go ahead.
Well, I was just to say, I think Nat and I, we've talked about this before, is like Nat and I were byproducts of the Jesus movement, right? So our parents, our mother was raised Christian. My dad didn't really become quote unquote born again until about 75. So I was 5, Nat was 4 when our father became a born again Christian. But one of the first groups that they belonged to was a Bible study of a lot of what we would call the Jesus movement people. And I've written about this and I've talked about this, that if you were to walk into the Bible study that our parents were in, you would say, okay, this is a bunch of people who literally just walked out of Haight-Ashbury and started a Bible study. My parents connected with that group of people, even though they weren't really of the hippie generation. I mean, they were of that generation, but they weren't what you would call quote unquote hippies. But what's interesting is how quickly that changes, right? So you have this idea of connecting to a person, Jesus, who has shown you the way to be free, to love one another, love your neighbor, love your enemy, all that stuff. And then what I found was very interesting was how quickly they started putting rules into place. And they just became another form of Christian evangelical, which then as we head to where we are now, it's a word that Nat and I both now kind of are on the same page. I believe that it's not salvageable. The word evangelical is lost to us, even though we know that it has a much better meaning than what is being portrayed today. But the word evangelical for me is gone. The word Christian for me is gone. Nat's diehardly holding on to it, but I have let it go as well. But
well, I have too. In fact, I wish we could go back to just being Jesus people.
Right. Yeah.
and just being known for that, for the teachings of Christ.
Yeah.
That to me would be acceptable. Yeah. Christianity, being a Christian, being an evangelical, it's really more a political identity than it is anything else now. And so it really has very little meaning in a spiritual sense. In a religious sense, it may have a little meaning, but it has no meaning in terms of what spirituality is, connecting with people, loving people, and it's just simply a political agenda.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, how sad is that's where we are now, right? Yeah. And I'm, for me personally, the word evangelical, I don't miss it. It doesn't hurt my feelings that I am not in any way connected to it. I seriously don't miss it. The word Christian, I'm kind of sad that it's lost its way in so many ways that I can't call myself a Christian anymore. And we've talked about this before too. I mean, when someone asks me if I'm a Christian, I have to ask the question back. Well, what does that mean to you? And
that's a good question.
And then,
yeah.
From that answer, I can tell them yes or no. But I would consider myself a Jesus follower or a follower of the way, which is, very historically correct to say anyway. But for the most part, when people, when you ask, well, what does Christian mean to you? When they give you, when they can see what's happening in this world today within the Christian world, I would have to pretty much denounce most of what they think is a Christian. And it's because of the hatred, the vitriol that connects to that word, right?
Well, and I saw that happening very early on. I mean, once the moral majority came on the scene in the 1980s, and what that led to in the 1990s, and then by the time we get to 2000s, it was clear to me that quote evangelicals were becoming simply were being absorbed, if you will, and quite frankly exploited by political operatives within the Republican Party. And anytime religion and politics mix, it's the religion that's going to suffer. It's the religion that is going to be completely decimated. Religion cannot play a sanctification role in politics. It just isn't going to happen that way. And so by 2005, so it's been about over 15 years now since I've kind of walked away from it. But you still over time, I don't know if you guys have experienced this, but over time, even once you leave that behind you, you begin to unlearn. You have to unlearn a lot of things. You have to begin to kind of reconstruct what faith means, what it means to follow Jesus, because it isn't what it used to be. It isn't what you thought it was. And so that's really kind of what my book is about. It's about that process of deconstructing all that and then reconstructing something that is actually very, very spiritual for me anyway, and meaningful.
I don't know. Did you notice this though too? I was naively hopeful when Donald Trump came on the scene. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. I mean, I was naively hopeful that he was such a stark example of what you just described, where a political party would pander to a certain voting bloc. There was no subtlety in his pandering whatsoever. And I was hopeful that because it was so obvious and so over the top that he was literally just manipulating people for votes, that they would see through it. And it turns out we like it too much. We enjoy being pandered to. And it's really, that's been the hardest thing for me to get over. There's been plenty of people throughout my lifetime who I thought were politically dishonest and, bad for the country and whatever. But I have not been part of something that turned family members against each other as often as this whole process did. And I found myself at odds with lots of people that I used to love and respect, that I still love, but my respect level went way down because I'm like, how are you not seeing this? This guy embodies everything that you dislike. He is literally the antithesis of everything your religion teaches, but because he's on your side, you'll excuse all of it.
Yeah.
And to me, it was just a huge power grab.
Yeah. And actually in my book, I have a chapter called Thanking Donald Trump.
Cool. Okay.
And it's not quite what you described. Actually, what I describe in that chapter is evangelicals, because of Donald Trump, were able to take their mask off.
Yeah,
They've been pretending for years that they pretended to care for people. They really didn't. They pretended to care for the poor. They really didn't. They don't care about that. Donald Trump gave them permission to take the mask off. There's no illusion. There's no faking it now. Evangelicals look in the mirror and they see Donald Trump. Now, the reason I write that we can thank Donald Trump is because I think it gave impetus and a catalyst for some other things to happen, like the Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter, gay rights, gun rights. These movements, and even though they don't look like they're maybe, dominant at the moment, I think they will be. And that's the part I'm hopeful about, is that down the road, we actually are going to come out on top of it. But no one has to be in any way fooled by evangelicals anymore. They are what they are. And if you look at Donald Trump, that's what they are.
Well, and the sad part of all of this is, so it makes us miss someone like Ronald Reagan. When we put them in comparison, there are even people on the liberal side saying, you know what, I wish we had another Ronald Reagan. But the sad part is Ronald Reagan was a horrible president when it came to things like you're just mentioning, LGBTQIA plus rights, specifically with the AIDS, right? With the AIDS epidemic, who he, conveniently and for a very long time wouldn't even comment on it. His, the war on drugs that started, prior to Reagan, but Reagan really
Reagan really pumped it up, though.
But that's how far the pendulum has swung, that even liberals sometimes will say, I kind of miss Reagan. And he was not, specifically with the liberal agenda that we are looking at, which is with the gay rights, indigenous rights, Black lives, the BIPOC community, all of that. He was not an ally of any of that.
I think what they mean, at least for me anyway, what it would mean to say, I wish we were back with Ronald Reagan, is there was a certain civility that went with doing politics in that day, so that a guy like Speaker of the House, can't remember his name right off the top of my head,
Tip O'Neill.
Yeah, Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan, they would dine together. They would get together and they were civil to one another, and they would work out deals, and they would get a few things done. Probably didn't make everybody happy, because compromise does that. It usually doesn't make everyone happy, but at least it was a civility. The thing I see now with evangelicals being so much a part of the political process is they have brought an apocalyptic attitude to it, meaning it's a zero-sum game. Either we win or nobody wins, or either we win or Satan wins. That means all the Democrats are evil and they're part of Satan's kingdom. So that's why you get people now with guns patrolling voting stations, because they want to keep the evil people away from voting. And they really don't care about voting anyway. They just care about power. That's all they're really worried about. But but it's really has metastasized into something that's quite frankly very, very scary and very, very, very difficult.
Yeah, and it's gone so far as to, I believe we're living in an age where we've always talked about end times. End times has always been part of the theology of the evangelical church. But we are living in an age of a political party and a religious group of people who are actively trying to make it happen. And if it means dropping nuclear bombs on people to help move forward the second coming of Christ, they are 1,000% behind it. And that scares the shit out of me.
Yeah, it's another chapter in my book, by the way. My book covers just about everything you can think of in the evangelical world. But I got a chapter on end times theology and how it threatens our culture. And that kind of thinking, that apocalyptic thinking, is very much a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Absolutely.
And if you think God is coming back with his armies of angels, if you can make a war happen on earth, well, you know what? You can probably, if you get into the realms of power where you can make things happen, maybe you can make that happen. And it's absolutely a horrible idea. And it threatens not only our culture, but it threatens the whole world, quite frankly. So I agree with you. I think that end times theology is just a horrible threat.
Well,
it's for me. It's like, go ahead, John. Sorry, you were going to say?
I was just going to ask you to comment on something you've commented on before, and that's this organization called IHOP, which
it's really how weird is that? I was literally Googling IHOP.
Oh, okay.
Because I forgot the guy's name, and I was going to bring up Mike Bickle. So you got Kansas City, big huge church called International House of Prayer. Mike Bickle is the pastor there, and they are steeped in this stuff. The entire point of that church is that they have this. Why the International House of Prayer is that they're 24/7, somebody in that place praying, and they're praying specifically for the end times to come, praying to usher those times in. And Mike Bickle has CDs after CD of end times prophecy and all kinds of and of course this church is riddled with scandal and weird stuff. But I actually first became aware of him because Brian Zond and Dr. Michael Brown, I should say, like, quote unquote, Dr. Michael Brown had a debate about atonement. And they actually had it at Mike Bickle's church on his campus. And so I was like, what the hell, these guys? But Mike, they're in Kansas City, and that's where Brian Zond's church is, north of Kansas City in St. Joseph. So I guess they knew each other somewhat. But I'm watching this multi-part YouTube debate about, it was called the, it was like the Monster God debate. So that's how Brian Zond is. Brian Zond would describe the God of penal substitutionary atonement as a monster because he requires a blood sacrifice to be mollified. And so he puts his son on the cross and offers him up as a blood sacrifice. So that sounds like pagan stuff to him. Sounds like something like, tossing virgins in a volcano kind of stuff. It doesn't sound like the Abba of Jesus. But that whole end time thing, I wrote a little bit about it in the book that I have coming out with Quoir next year. And my take on that was it gives Christianity, especially evangelical Christianity, such an escapist mentality. And it gives them an out to not give a damn about the world they live in because it's all going to burn.
Yeah, it's an excuse. It's an excuse not to do anything to help improve life for anybody.
Well, yeah, because that's not the point.
In our society, right?
Right, because the point of their faith is always so future. It's always so that it's at some point God's going to come, burn it all to the ground, and build us a new one. So, we just drive it like we stole it. And,
trying to make it happen sooner than later.
Yeah. And honestly, I think there is some, for some of those folks, maybe not so subtly, well, let's just hasten all of this by just trashing it all right now. And so I don't know about you. I meant to ask you this, and so we'll kick this little session off like this. For me, one of the first questions, one of the first little dominoes that began to fall was the end time stuff that I started to read a little bit about and go, not everyone believes this, right? Like outside of American evangelical Christianity, the way we have described rapture and end times and all this stuff is thought of as lunacy by a lot of folks. Most mainstream denominations don't give it a second thought. And so that was one of the dominoes that started to fall for me. I meant to ask you, for you, what were some of those first initial misgivings about the theology that you'd been given?
Well, that was one of them. I mean, early on, I grabbed onto a book called The Late Great Planet Earth by Hal Lindsey.
I remember it well.
Yeah. And it's a very fantastical, almost fiction type book, although he didn't mean it as fiction. But it's so crazy. It's so far out there. And then it was followed up by the Left Behind series, the whole Left Behind thing. And that in itself was just so fantastical. It sounded like a fiction movie of some kind. But I'll tell you the thing that actually really caused me to question what I was in and what I was thinking and believing was probably something much more simple. It was the fact that I couldn't reconcile as a teacher. I was teaching kids in Christian schools and high school and so on. We were talking about history. We were talking about religion. And I couldn't reconcile a lot of the questions that kids had. They actually asked pretty good questions. And I allowed them to. One of the things that I guess I did, maybe coming out of my hippie days, is say, yeah, let's talk about it. Let's rap about it. Let's talk about it. And they would ask me questions, and I couldn't answer some of their questions about evolution. I couldn't answer some of their questions about a 6-day creation, and it did not make sense to a modern 20th century mind anymore. Then, you put that together with things like when you're in a Christian ministry and you experience a divorce. I experienced a divorce in the early 90s. And I had a guy come into my office. I was a principal of a Christian school at the time. And he said to me, I hear you've got a divorce pending. And I said, yeah, it's rough. I fully expected him to say, well, hey, let me know if there's anything to do to help you. He didn't. He said, God has told me that you should resign your position because you're no longer a good role model for kids. And I said, whoa, what did God's voice sound like? Tell me what his voice, was it like James Earl Jones or, Darth Vader or, but I mean, that sort of just non-compassionate, let's kick you while you're down. And I've seen that over and over. It wasn't just for me. I've seen it with other people through the years that when somebody falls within the evangelical faith, there's not a lot of compassion there. There's a lot of kick them while they're down and kick them out. I've talked to many, many people like that have been, quote, disfellowshipped because they asked the wrong question or their marriage went south or, whatever the case may be. And I realized then that wasn't what Jesus was teaching about at all. That's not even close. And so I realized that faith was so much part of what you had to believe. You had to believe doctrines and creeds and, propositional statements that I realized that can't be faith, because faith is a way of facing the mystery of our existence in the universe and trying to understand what that is. And the reality is there's probably not a good answer to that. But faith keeps you going. Faith keeps you moving forward to try to understand and try to incorporate that into your own life. Well, when you start talking like that in the evangelical church, they think, they say, well, you better pray about that, brother.
Right.
You better get back on the right track because you're headed a one-way ticket to disfellowship, quite frankly.
I find it very interesting that most of our first steps away from evangelical Christianity is something where we see where the evangelical church doesn't allow room for a marginalized group, right? So be it someone, obviously we've heard, we all grew up in evangelical church. So we know that divorce is something that's absolutely frowned upon. And to the point where, where you may or may not be allowed to be in any kind of leadership role if you have been divorced. For me, it was the LGBTQI plus community. When I was about 18, I was introduced to a whole community that I was told was evil, wrong, just misguided, didn't understand the biblical, the biblical side of what was going on. And I could not figure out what these people were doing wrong, as I got to know them. And I got to know them and love them and become friends with them. And it just seems like the church wants to continually go after marginalized groups as they are no longer or have never been part of the community. And I find this time and time again, it might not be the same group of people, but it seems to be a marginalized group of people within the evangelical church that they seem to go after first. That seems to be one of the steps that starts breaking down your connection to this Christian faith. Would you agree with that?
You said the word connection, and that is absolutely the right thing. You talked about, you connected with people who were LGBTQ, and when you have that connection to people and you learn about their lives and who they are, that creates a connection. You know what that to me is? That's faith. That is the definition of faith. And when we use faith as a set of propositions by which we separate people, and we say, hey, you're in that group and you're not in our group because you don't believe the right. There's no connection in that. There's no human connection. And I believe if there was anything that Jesus taught at all, it was to connect to people, marginalized people, poor people, people who are, poor of spirit, people who are, we need to show mercy. You connect to people, and that expands your faith. That expands who you are as a human being. And ultimately, I think it becomes a question of what kind of human being are you? I think Jesus was interested much more about what kind of people and what kind of humans we were than where we're going to end up after we die. He really did not teach that much about after our death. He taught so much more about what kind of human are you? Are you connecting to people? Do you love Zacchaeus? Do you love the woman at the well? Do you love the guy at the cross who was, the Roman soldier? You love those people? And when the church sets up these rules and these boundaries and these barriers to keep you from loving other people who aren't quite within the group, that is the exact opposite of what Jesus taught. I had to get out of that. I mean, and quite frankly, for me to become more spiritual, so think about this, I had to get away from the church to become more spiritual. And what I mean by spiritual is connecting with people without any qualification, without any conditions. Let's just get together as human beings and love one another. And that goes back to my original place where I started with Christianity. That's what I thought it was about. And like I said, by the 80s, it was like, no. There's an in-group and an out-group, and you better be conservative, and you better vote for Reagan, and you better now it's Donald Trump. You better like Donald Trump and exclude people, right? So you are exactly right. I think it's about connection and following that teaching of Christ. I just don't think Jesus would even recognize what Christianity is in his name today if he were to come back. Well, he'd look around and say, what the hell have you people done with my teaching? This is not what I had in mind.
I don't even know. I find myself sometimes at a loss for words with the whole thing. But going back to what we talked about too, then with the sort of the bastardization of the word evangelical, that's where we land, right? We land in this place where that word no longer describes. I tried for a minute. John knows me enough to know I'm a contrarian enough to know that I would try my damnedest to reclaim the word and say, yes, I am an evangelical in the truest sense of the word, which I think means we're charged with proclaiming the good news. I think where we differ on that is what that good news entails. And for so many of my so-called evangelical brethren, the good news is predicated first and foremost on bad news. And so they feel the need to make sure that it's all bad. By the way, you're bad, but don't worry, I can fix it, So the good news is always prefaced with this really bad news, but in the truest sense of the word, I still see myself that way, But the baggage that comes along with that word is just, it's made it irredeemable, and so it's but that was some of those dominoes that had to fall then were like you said, when you're raised inside of a system that is constantly setting up an other, right? Someone to, I guess, define yourself against. It's like talking to, we talk to folks about, say, white nationalism. We talk to, folks about race relations, and inside of whiteness, we've set up white as whiteness is the norm by which everything else is compared. We've done the same thing with Christianity. We've decided that Christianity is the norm, and now we did that Derridian thing where we set up a binary where it's now Christian and non-Christian, with Christian now being superior, the implication, and everything being subordinate to that. And we've created hierarchies just based on our own definitions. So for me, I'm guessing for you as well, it made sense to start to tear those structures down, at least for myself. Would you agree? I mean, some of those things just need to go away, right?
I think the key word you used was the word fear.
Yeah.
And I think evangelical Christianity, and Christianity in general maybe, is really predicated on the idea of fear of sin, fear of hell, fear of, the devil, fear of the other people who aren't like us. And so instead of preaching the good news, which is, hey, we're all connected. It doesn't matter. Forget the fear. Let's do what Jesus said and love each other as we love ourselves. We set up these artificial boundaries and definitions, and so much of it is based on pure beliefs. That is, you have to believe a certain way. And if you don't, then there's just really, really something wrong with you. But that, when we can overcome that, and I think that was the big change for me, was to realize that is just so opposite of the true teachings of Christ. Now, I'm actually kind of optimistic. I think that evangelicalism has been the mask has come off now in the last 4, 5, 6 years in the light or the wake of Trumpism, that I think it is a dying, as loud as it is something that dies sometimes can be very, very loud. But I think it's a dying movement. Let me put it that way. And what I think can come out of it, hopefully, when there's enough people who will question and doubt it. See, that's what it's going to take. And that's why the part of the definition of my book is finding, faith through doubt and questioning. When we doubt and question all of these assumptions that the evangelical Christianity has tried to dictate to us, we can find a spirituality that begins to unite us. And I think that's out there. I think that can happen. Now, I'm not trying to be Pollyannish, but I really believe we're headed into something new. And, anything that's dying is going to put up a fuss. Anything that's dying is really going to put up a fight. And that's what we're seeing with evangelical Christianity right now. But it's just a matter of time. I know my kids, they're in their 30s. My grandkids are in their teens now, right? They won't have anything to do with evangelical. They don't want even to associate with that in their lives. They've kind of probably learned from me, I guess. And I think that's true of those generations coming up. It's a dying breed, and they've done nothing. Evangelical Christianity has only hastened their own demise, in my opinion. No,
I agree. I mean, to me, it's a death rattle, right? I mean, it is. But I've been predicting, and I've got friends who have been not just the death of evangelical Christianity, but the death of Protestantism in general. I feel like Protestantism is breathing its last breaths, as it should. It needs to die as a movement. It's outlived its usefulness. The divisions are no longer important or pertinent. It's enough already, right? So, but you're right. I mean, I had this image in my mind as you were talking about that scene in one of the Lord of the Rings movies where Gandalf has vanquished the huge demon god thing, right? And he's falling down into the into the chasm or whatever, and we're like, ooh, we beat him, and just before he goes, he slings up and grabs Gandalf by the leg and drags him down with him. That to me feels like what we're engaged in. Like I feel like you're right. I feel like we're, like that's a movement that has been exposed, that is probably just desperately clinging to its last little vestiges of influence and power, and will make a hell of a lot of noise as it goes out. But who knows how long that will take? I don't know. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, it might be a blink of an eye, but for the rest of us stuck around, I mean, our good buddy Donald J. Trump's going to probably announce his 2024 run here pretty quick, and we may have 4 more years of darkness ahead of us before it's all said and done.
And that very well could be. I think you have to look at the long game. Evangelicals have a lot of powerful people with a lot of money in their corner. So even though their numbers are going to dwindle, and they will, they're going to dwindle because it's a bankrupt political ideology. It's not even, I even hate to call it a religion, but
no, it is a political ideology. You're right.
It's a political ideology. So it's dwindling. And when you look at the demographics are clear. The United States is becoming much more diverse. And within 20 years, white people will no longer be the majority of this country. Well, that's part of the fear that they're trying to drive into, this religious ideology is we've got to keep Christianity and in particular, by the way, white Protestant Christianity in charge, because that's the way it's always been. Right?
Yeah.
Well, it's on its way out. And so it may take, if you look at it over the period of 20, 30 years from now, I think we'll be looking at something very different. But it can still kick a fit between now and then. So
yeah, and there's no guarantee that what rises up in its place will be any better. So, the pessimist in me says we are such suckers for systems and structures and everything. We may think we've invented something new. I'm even, within this whole thing we call deconstruction, I'm pessimistic. Because it will have its utility for a while, but what's it gonna look like in 10 years? Or we're probably gonna have to deconstruct what we've been deconstructing. But at least, honestly, I kind of hope we will. I mean, otherwise we won't have evolved at all. And so,
well, there's another key word, evolve, because when I look at, and this goes back, I'm going to go back to my book. Sorry, guys. I wrote another chapter. I wrote another chapter about tribalism in my book. And how much tribalism is really incorporated really in our DNA. It's just kind of part of who we are as humans. And if I understand the teachings of Jesus, I think Jesus was actually addressing that innate tribalism that we have and saying we need to go beyond, we need to evolve beyond the human tribalism. Because he lived in a very tribal world. My God, he couldn't even talk to the Samaritans without getting, in trouble. And so he's saying, no, we can move beyond tribalism. So my hope, and it's hard to be optimistic. I understand that. But my hope is that if enough people can evolve beyond the innate tribalism that we have, and maybe the teachings of Jesus, but I would go beyond that. It may be the teachings of Buddha. It may be the teachings of the Dalai Lama. It may be others who can help us with that, right? To move beyond that tribalism and to realize we're all connected. We are all connected. And once we do that and realize it, hey, those barriers fall down. There aren't any walls anymore. So I understand your pessimism, and it's real. I don't doubt it. But I guess I'm trying to be optimistic. So,
well, and in the book I'm writing that hopefully Quoir will publish sometime soon, one of the comments that I make, and I don't call him out by name, but I'm taking a quote from Paul Young, which says, all roads don't lead to Christ, but Christ is on all roads. And I've gone a step further, and I've said that all roads maybe don't lead to Christ, but at the end you find Christ. Because I think, like you bring up Buddhism, Taoism, all these other faiths, because always there's been this question, right? Well, how do we know that places that don't hear the name Jesus are included in this heavenly afterlife? And you hear, you get these canned answers like, well, God will make himself known. Well, what if the answer is that God has made himself known through these other teachings of, say, someone like Buddha? So I have come to the conclusion that Jesus is on all paths, and all paths lead to redemption. And that might be through Buddhist teachings, through Taoist teachings. And I find more faith affirming theology, whatever you want to call it, outside of the Christian faith than I ever do in the Christian faith. When it comes to things like being mindful, being present, being part of nature, being part of the process that moves us forward as human beings to the point where we love one another, as opposed to finding out how we're different and how we hate each other. And if you find that through Buddha, I applaud you. I no longer feel like that's not an accessible way to become a better human being.
I disagree. I go back to actually one of the sort of watershed moments for me was I read Rob Bell's book Love Wins, right? And so I read that book and instantly became a heretic, because that's what happens when you read Rob Bell. You become a heretic. But I resonated. There was I think early on in the book, he says something about having quoted Gandhi somewhere, and somebody commented, well, he's in hell, right? And he's like, oh, you know this, you have confirmation. But he starts asking these questions about what do we do with truth, that maybe seems to come from outside our tradition. Is not all truth God's truth? But it's one of those deals, it's like I get told all the time that there's a slippery slope we're on. And I'm like, I sure as hell hope so. I hope it's like a slip and slide. Like, I hope we just I want to be like Paul Simon, slip sliding away. And, come on, we could do a little Simon and Garfunkel, right?
Yeah, oh yeah.
The bigger your destination, the more you're slip sliding away, baby. So I was going through the chapters or the parts of your book too. I'm kind of looking through it as we talk, and the other thing that I thought was interesting was the whole faith and gay rights thing. Was that a difficult hurdle for you to get over? Speaking for myself, it was. I'll be honest and say that was a tough one. Not that I ever hated or disliked anybody, but so deeply ingrained in my evangelical brain was this thing. It was a difficult thing, but what was your experience with that?
Yeah, that was that. I write several chapters on gay rights and my transformation on that whole thing, and it kind of goes back to the idea of redefining faith as connecting with people, right? As opposed to setting up these barriers. But I recount an experience I had as a young evangelical in our church youth group where we had a gay kid join our group, and we just treated him awful. I mean, and we felt like we had permission to do that because, he got the clobber verses out, and you can tell him, you need to choose a different orientation and all of this. And it was actually, I'll tell you what, it was actually my daughter. She's not gay, but she stood up for gay rights in school and with other kids that she knew. She had a lot of gay friends. And over time, through her understanding and working and just bringing her gay friends over to the house, again, it goes back to connection. I got to know those kids. I got to hear about one of her friends who got kicked out of his house because his parents didn't want him there anymore because he was gay. And it was such a transformation. And then, not long after I walked away from evangelical faith, that whole thing opened up to me that, you know what? And it kind of goes back to Rob Bell. Love wins. Love wins every time. And it doesn't matter who you love. If you love someone, love them. And that's going to create that connection. So, yeah, I've completely turned around on that issue. And when you're teaching in a Christian school, you better not be talking about gay rights.
Sure.
if you want a one-way ticket,
to unemployment.
Yeah, that's probably one of the fastest ways to do it. The other one is abortion. You can't come out and talk about any kind of choice. But the whole gay community thing is so important, I think. But that's an issue. I write a chapter in the book. I hate to keep going back to that. I talk about the irrelevance of evangelical Christianity because they have placed their last stand, just like Custer, on the hill of gay marriage, or anti-gay marriage, I should say. And as we progress, as we evolve, people are looking at that and saying, are you people crazy? How cruel and abusive can you be to people who have? So I think, again, this is just a matter of time. Give this a little more time. And our society has come around very quickly, quite frankly, on this issue, just like I did. And we're going to see evangelicals being very, very marginalized. I don't want to see anybody marginalized, but they're marginalizing themselves by taking these kinds of stands, and that hurt people.
Yeah, I'm fine with drawing a distinction, by the way. I don't want to marginalize people, but I'm fine with marginalizing hate. So you can stop being hateful anytime you want to. And I will know I'm not interested in marginalizing an individual. I feel like Jesus calling out the Pharisees when he didn't call out, specific Pharisees. He's calling out a structure. He's calling out a system that marginalizes and dehumanizes. And so feel free to change your opinion on this anytime and open your arms to people. One of the things that John and I have talked about a bunch, is that I don't think bias in general, I don't think those kinds of things, I don't think they ever survive true relationships. Second I began to actually form real relationships with people, those things had to go away because, biases are always built on caricatures. They're always built on things that are just not true. And so all of a sudden you have, oh my gosh, there's more to this person than who they have sex with. Oh, what a shock. The gay agenda might actually not have anything to do with, turning your kids gay. It might actually have to do with human rights and wanting to live a life that is, where they have agency and choices and they can pursue their dreams. So when those things begin to be defined different ways, I think you're right. I think the evangelical mindset will find itself marginalized. But at the end of the day, you're free to leave that mindset anytime you want to and come over to the dark side. We have pie and coffee. So come on.
Yeah. Well, I have a good friend. That I worked with who a female, who's married. She's straight, but she has a terrific relationship with a gay man. And I know both of them. I spent time with them, and just it's so fun to watch them together. The straight woman with a gay guy. So I started looking into that, and I found out there's a whole area of research between relationships between straight women and gay men. So as I studied that, I put a chapter in the book called "What Straight Men Need to Learn from Gay Men About How to Love Women." It's very counterintuitive. It's very counterintuitive because in many, many ways, one of the things that straight women love about gay men is how strong they are emotionally and personally. And of course, a lot of straight guys are just so, insecure, and they think they got to be patriarchs and they've got to, do all this. But that whole relationship thing becomes very, very different once you begin to see it in action in a different way. So anyway, I just throw that out.
I like that. I mean, there's got to be something to that, to learning how to love without a perceived agenda too. Because,
without being patriarchal. How do men relate to women without being patriarchal?
Right, or without sexualizing them, or without right. I mean, there's a whole history of men pretty much just objectifying and sexualizing women, even women we aren't in a relationship with, because that's just the way we've been taught to think of them. And it must be pretty damn refreshing to have a friendship with someone that's not based on any of that.
Exactly. And if straight men would just simply take a minute and observe how gay men interact with women, they would learn a heck of a lot about how to relate to women. It really would change things. But anyway,
you're not wrong, man. You're not wrong. That's why I started watching Queer Eye for the Straight Guy, because hey, you laugh, but that show, dude, that is a groundbreaking show. I thought it was silly, so I never watched it. And my wife started watching it like last year. It's touching. I mean, it is amazing, because what you see in action is what we're talking about right now, which is where these folks go into situations where they might otherwise find themselves at odds. They form relationships, there are connections made, and suddenly there is this love between these people that are basically strangers that you can begin to see blossom. And you go, oh, look at that. Humanity wins out over ideology eventually.
Exactly.
So, I think it's amazing.
You don't have to go too far back in our podcast to find quotes from me saying things like this, that the red button issue for conservatives is abortion. And there's going to be a point to this here in a second. And that you will never see them change their position because they need you to be scared to death that abortion is the one thing that we need to fix in this country. But they will never fix it. They will never, ever fix it because they need you to vote from that. Well, we all know that Roe v. Wade was overturned recently, and that's because they found a better red button issue. And that was LGBTQIA rights, trans rights, and all of within that community. So when they found a better red button issue, they went ahead and pushed Roe v. Wade to be destroyed, to be turned over, because they now have a much better red button issue to scare the shit out of the conservative right. And that is the LGBTQIA agenda. And that is to take over the bathrooms, take over whatever the fuck they're talking about.
They're taking over Disney, John.
Yeah, they're taking over Disney.
Kids, man.
And so you don't have to go back very far into our episodes where I say that abortion will never be overturned, because if they overturn it, they can't get your votes anymore. And I have to stand correct. Yeah, I have to stand corrected because they found something that even is more. And again, I'm putting this in quotes because we're not on video for our listeners, more scary than abortion. And that is LGBTQIA rights and their agenda.
Yeah.
And that,
no, I've already been called a groomer. And within my family, I've been called a groomer, because I'm kind of for, let's not ban books. Let's talk to kids about what they're thinking and feeling about themselves. And so they think I'm trying to groom them. It's like, okay, I see where this is going. You're right. I think you're right, John. I think it's the new wedge issue that will allow the Republican Party to rile up. Let's rile up some people so they'll come out and vote. And that's probably what's going to happen tomorrow. It's a lot of people.
The scary part about it is, okay, so we've overturned Roe v. Wade. The next thing we're going to overturn is gay marriage. And right after that is going to be, and Clarence Thomas, you should be scared to death, because the next thing after we get rid of gay marriage is going to be interracial marriage. And he is just quietly standing there letting this happen. And I believe it's 2022, almost 2023, but I feel a lot like we're back in the 1950s.
I'll give you an example, John. Check this out. They're going to vote on an ordinance in my town tomorrow. And the ordinance is to create my town of San Angelo, Texas, as a sanctuary city for the unborn.
A sanctuary city for the unborn.
So we are going and I bet it passes. But they want to create the most draconian anti-abortion measures. So obviously you won't. We don't have a plan. We don't have a Planned Parenthood anymore. I haven't had one for years. But they're gonna make it illegal. They're gonna actually coerce people to rat on their neighbors, because if you are found guilty of providing transportation to somebody, if you're a business owner and you provide insurance that covers abortion, you can be prosecuted. If they find out that you donate to pro-abortion causes, you can be prosecuted. If you actually take somebody across, to another part of Texas where abortion is not illegal in Texas, it's illegal. It will be in our town. And again, I don't know how much of this has any teeth. I don't know how much of it will be enforceable. But to me, that's That's going way beyond saying abortion should be rare or, right? Anyway, so it's getting very hands-made tale over here, man.
I'm just going to, I'm so angry at any of this. It's just going to be another soapbox moment for me. And, our listeners are used to that. But first of all, I stand here as a white, middle-aged, cisgender man saying anybody who ever needs transportation, any place to get them to a place where they can get an abortion, my vehicle is ready, willing, and able to get you wherever you need. But to criminalize this is so absurd, and in the words of Nat Draconian. I mean, we've seen the ads on the left side, and I have a tendency to agree with them, where they have this ad where this person's talking about, hey, this is what you're going to do for your pregnancy, and this is how this is going to move forward. And then they pan away, and it's like it's a 10 or 13-year-old girl, right? Because it's, you don't, God forbid we offer them any kind of chance at an abortion because this is probably incest or rape or whatever. It's just so obnoxiously crazy, evil to expect a 13-year-old person to carry a baby to term and be born, and then have the same group of religious right people now give her shit because she can't afford to cover just basic life and needs for this child. And now she's now a loser because she needs welfare, some kind of food stamps or anything like that to take care of this child, which now we call her someone who's not willing to be part of the society, right? And be like a productive part of society.
It's not very pro-life, is it?
No. And that's the other thing that I wish that, you on the right, and I'm talking to you specifically, and I know that you don't listen to this podcast, but if you're happen to listening, you on the right, you're not pro-life, you're pro-birth. You absolutely have always only ever been pro-birth. You're not pro-life, because if that was the case, you would not send 18-year-olds out of the country to die for some crazy war that you think is justified. You will not send people to death row because eye for an eye. All of this is just so ridiculous. You're not pro-life, you're pro-birth. And you need to admit that to yourselves and learn from...
To criminalize abortion is the opposite of pro-life. It's pro-death, because it will result in more women dying from whatever kind of abortion they'll seek out. Abortion won't go away. This is not going to end abortion just because they criminalize it.
No.
It's very much like drugs. In that sense, if you want to stop drug use, well, probably the last thing you want to do is criminalize it all. Let's think of another way. Maybe there's a little more creative way we have here to deal with things like abortion. And there are ways. I mean, Colorado made birth control free for teenagers and women, and their abortion rates went down by 50% in a couple-year period. I mean, there are ways to reduce abortion if that's your goal, and actually, I'm not opposed to that objective, but you don't do it by criminalizing women and making them have to go to back alleys to find an abortion. It's pro-death, in my opinion. It's not pro-life at all.
Imagine this: education and access to resources actually works in reducing abortions.
And it does.
You see it play out in the numbers. Anytime there's a Republican or a conservative in office, abortions go higher. There were fewer abortions in 8 years of Obama than there were the previous 8 years of Bush. It's just a demonstrable fact. So the only thing I can conclude is that prohibition doesn't work.
It's never worked.
It's never worked. That curtailing behavior does not have anything to do with just saying no. But the only other difference I can think of is that during those 8 years of Obama, there was more access to birth control. There was more access to education. There were just more resources made available. And well, lo and behold, if that was your goal, was to reduce the number of abortions, then we should be looking at the data to see how that gets accomplished. It's absolutely insane.
And the data shows that premarital sex or whatever you want to call it, sex outside of marriage, does not diminish under any political party. The only difference is the access to some kind of birth control that happens.
Well, imagine that. Human beings are going to have sex.
Yeah.
Wow. That's just great. I saw a really funny meme, though, John. You want me to describe the meme I saw?
Sure.
You know how you solve the problem of premarital sex being a sin? You just never get married. It was never premarital. It was just outside of marriage.
It was just outside of marriage sex.
If you never intend to get married, you never had premarital sex. You're good to go, man. So there's your rebuttal. Man, it's been. I tell you what, you guys need to buy this book. I say that having not read it, but having while we're chatting, I'm going through the chapters. I'm going yes. Jim Palmer wrote your foreword. That's amazing.
Yeah. He was terrific. He was a real help and mentor for me.
He's such a nice guy, man. Confessions of a Recovering Evangelical. I can't even say the word, John. Saying the word evangelical. I'm going to end up like Fonzie. I'm going to date myself, who couldn't say he was sorry. I'm sorry. I just, every time I try to say the word evangelical, it will sort of fall out of my mouth. But Confessions of a Recovering Evangelical, Overcoming Fear and Certainty to Find Faith Through Doubt and Questions. Forward by Jim Palmer, who is someone we'd love to get on the show. So if you can help us with that, that'd be great. But man, Quoir's just doing awesome stuff, man. They just keep putting out good stuff. And Daniel, I wish you all the success, man. I see that your book is doing really, really well. We'll do our very best to see if we can't pump those numbers up by 2 or 3. Our 5 or 6 listeners will certainly pull their resources and buy one copy.
Come on now.
So that'll be good. No, it's man, we've just appreciated having you on the podcast, man. Thanks for coming.
Well, hey, it's been fun. I've enjoyed talking with you guys, and I love your podcast, and I wish you the best with this too. So, hey, keep it up. Keep going.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate you, man.
Thank you for listening to This Is Not Church. Be sure to rate and review the podcast on your platform of choice. If you would like to partner with us, visit patreon.com/thisisnotchurch. where you will receive exclusive content such as early access to episodes, videos of upcoming episodes, and live Q&A sessions. Be sure to check out our Facebook group or follow us on Twitter and Instagram. All the links are in the show notes. We'll be back soon with another episode.